Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to the 2022 Presidential Plenary. It's truly my honor to be president of SWR and to be able to introduce our speaker. It's really an honor to welcome the 2022 Presidential Plenary Speaker, Maria Hinojosa. As a reporter who was the first Latina in many newsrooms, Maria Hinojosa dreamt of a place or a space where she could create independent multimedia journalism that explores and gives a critical voice to the diverse American experience. She made that dream a reality in 2010 when she created Futuro Media, an independent nonprofit newsroom based in Harlem, New York, with the mission of creating multimedia content from a people of color perspective. Futuro does this in the service of empowering people to navigate the complexities of an increasingly diverse and connected world. As the anchor and executive producer of the Peabody Award-winning show Latino USA, many of you know it from Saturday mornings and other times during your local NPR station schedule that is distributed by NPR, as well as co-host of the In the Thick, the Futuro Media's award-winning political podcast, Maria has informed millions about the changing cultural and political landscape in America and abroad. Her new book, Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America, Maria tells the story of immigration in America through her family's experiences and decades of reporting, painting an unflinching portrait of a country in crisis. She is also a contributor to the long-running award-winning news program CBS Sunday Morning and a frequent guest on MSNBC. Maria's 30-year career, nearly 30-year career as an award-winning journalist includes reporting for PBS, CBS, WNBC, CNN, NPR, and anchoring the Emmy Award-winning talk show from WGBH studios, Maria Hinojosa One-on-One. She's also the author of 2 books and has dozens of awards, including 4 Emmys, a John Chancellor Award, the Studs Terkel Community Media Award, 2 Robert F. Kennedy Awards, the Edward R. Murrow Award from the Overseas Press Club, and the Ruben Salazar Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. She has been recognized by People en Español as one of the 25 most powerful Latina women. Additionally, she was the first Latina to anchor a PBS Frontline report, Lost in Detention, which aired in October of 2011 and was the first to explore abuse at immigrant detention facilities, garnering attention from Capitol Hill, as well as both the mainstream and Spanish language media. As a reporter for NPR, Maria was among the first to report on youth violence in urban communities on a national scale. During her 8 years as CNN's urban affairs correspondent, Maria Hinojosa often took viewers into communities rarely shown on television and continued that long-form work on PBS. At Futuro Media, Maria continues to bring attention to experiences and points of view that are often overlooked or underrepresented in mainstream media, all while mentoring the next generation of diverse journalists to delve into authentic and nuanced stories. In 2018, she was a fellow at the Shorenstein Center of Harvard's Kennedy School and is a frequent speaker across the country. In 2019, she was named the inaugural Distinguished Journalist in Residence at her alma mater, Barnard College in New York. I don't want to take up Maria's time, but I'm very honored to call her a colleague and friend, and rather than to take too much of her time, I introduce to you Maria Hinojosa.
Hola, everybody. How you doing? I'm sorry to be so far away from you in Washington, D.C. I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful conference. Enjoy the green behind me. If I'm interrupted, it will be because of birds. And this is one way in which I'm able to heal myself. I was only supposed to be here in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, for a couple of weeks. And then it just began to feel like going back was actually not only less safe, but not helping the situation in the city where we live, New York City. So here we are. But I love being with you, and I've been listening to the speakers. Congratulations on your awards. I'm so proud of you. um, from the fields to the award stage and dissertations and doctorates, and wow, felicidades. You really inspire me. And I was thinking about the speech today as I was getting ready to write it. And I was like, oh my God, I love this so much. I love Dr. Zayas. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much for thinking of me. Um, we are kind of connected in one of these powerful ways. The theme of the speech that I wanted to actually say is that, and you know this all, I'm simply going to emphasize it by telling you the stories of my recent work and my experience. But it's, you know this because it's the thing that motivates you to do the work that you do, like Dr. Zayas, right? And to the next generations coming up, right? It is ultimately a very kind of philosophical and very personal thing, very spiritual, right? Which is this thought that you can, in fact, change one person's life. And we know that that's possible. And that's part of what I want to talk about, because I think right now we really need to feel support and love and a sense of power of what we're doing, so that you stay and remain committed to what you're doing. Let me just make sure that that's not me. Is that me that's flipping there? Let me just check my technician. Thanks. So it is about this very kind of personal and very intimate connection to hope in its most based way. And the thought that we can, in our work, change someone's life. Now, when I think of how I end up here, it's through Dr. Zayas. And I end up coming upon Dr. Zayas's work because of a dear friend, may she rest in peace, a dear journalist, Elaine Rivera, Puerto Rican, who actually was battling severe depression, and we didn't know it yet, but she was battling alcohol addiction. But she was a brilliant, brilliant journalist. And she engaged with the work of Dr. Zayas, wrote about the research that was being done in terms of Latinas for multiple generations who had the highest rate of attempted suicide in the United States, and that no one was talking about it. Hold on one second. Raul, there seems to be some, I want you to take a look. It's just, all right, good. Let's hope that a second my assistant shows up, it doesn't stop jumping, but this way at least he can see it, and we'll see. Let's see, just take a look and you'll see if there's a jump or not. Anyway, let me continue speaking with you. So Elaine writes about the research of Dr. Zayas, right, who, as you know, was simply following the numbers, actually, the data. And when he heard what you all know, right, which is that hospitals were saying, no, there's a lot of intake here for Latinas. They present for attempted suicide quite often. And that ends up getting into the New York Times, that ends up getting into El Diario La Prensa, that ends up really changing me as a journalist, because I saw what Elaine did with investigative work and connecting with Dr. Zayas. And that work of then publicizing as journalists our role to take the work of a social worker and amplify, right? It was really life-changing, right? And then I get to meet Dr. Zayas, and then I invite him to my classes where I'm, I like to joke that I'm a Mexican immigrant, and so I have 16 jobs, and so I am a professor along with everything else, and so I'm able to invite Dr. Zayas to come into my class and to speak. The dean coming to my undergraduate classes and connecting with my students and empowering them to believe that the thing that they want to research, the thing that they feel in their gut, that they know from experience, experiential, is the thing that they need to follow and work. So Why is that important? It's actually really important because it's the seeds that are planted in us, right? That allow us all to believe in this capacity of changing one person's life. But the seeds are also planted in us that allow us to understand what is going to be the great work of our time. And you have all chosen the field of social work. And so I'm honored. I'm going to get to the connection of social work in a second, more specifically. But let me just talk for a moment about my father, because if it wasn't for my dad, Dr. Raul Hinojosa, que en paz descanse, may he rest in peace, I wouldn't have ended up in the United States. So my dad is born in Tampico, Tamaulipas, in Mexico, on the Gulf Coast, and it's a really hot, humid town. Now a big city. My dad's dad did not go to college, but my dad had this dream that he wanted to help people who were deaf, who wanted to hear. He wanted to help them figure out how to do that. In the 1940s and 50s. So you imagine that they probably said, "Ay, Raúl, estás loco. You're crazy." I love that he never gave up. It was that commitment to that thing that he had inside of him that told him, do this work, that ends up getting him hired by the University of Chicago, that ends up getting him to Chicago and all of us following him. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about my arrival story in a minute. But what ends up happening is that we all end up going to Chicago. My mom is married to my dad at the age of 17, does not have a high school degree, came from a very good family, but she didn't finish high school. And after my mom essentially has 4 kids and perfects the art of making beds, my mom used to wash my sister's tennis shoelaces every single night and put them out to dry so that she could go to school with perfectly white tennis shoes on the south side of Chicago in the 1960s. The women who were studying, many of them Jewish radical feminists who were at the University of Chicago, thought my mom, they thought she was a little crazy, actually. They're like, why are you doing that? There's so much more to life. And my mom, that kind of plants a seed in my mom, who was clearly very independent thinking and forward thinking. It was like, yeah, I'll leave Mexico and move to the United States with my husband. She was a open-minded. After my mom when I turn 8 years old, I'm the youngest now of 4. And that's when my mom basically says, I want to do more, wants to leave the house. What's the way to leave the house when you don't have a high school degree and your husband doesn't really want you to leave the house? But she ends up becoming a volunteer social worker at the University of Chicago, the first bilingual social worker that we know of at the University of Chicago hospitals. And my mom knew how to do this, the thing that you train for. And I believe that the reason why you're there is because you have this in you too. You know how to do this. You get that PhD dissertation to affirm what you already know. Mom already knew how to do this work. And so there she was, being a bilingual social worker at the University of Chicago. She was a godsend. There were not many Mexicanos in our area of Hyde Park near the University of Chicago, but there were a few. And Mom did an incredible job. And so I think it was after a year of being a volunteer social worker at the University of Chicago and going to work with my dad, right? So my dad would drive Mom to work because, right? This made my father much more accepting of what was happening. His wife would be volunteering in the hospital where he was working. It was kind of a professional, people would see this as a positive. My father was like, why is my wife working, kind of thing, from Mexico, very traditional. Bueno, my mom is labeled and voted the, hold on a second. Hold on one second. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. multiple machines going on at the same time. Actually, that was Chase Bank calling me back. They told me they'd call back in 5 hours, and I guess they were right. So anyway, I missed Chase Bank's call. Okay. My mom is voted Social Worker of the Year. She's voted Social Worker of the Year. They come and they take a portrait of her, a professional portrait. My mom, who didn't finish high school, she is on the wall of the University of Chicago as the Social Worker of the Year award. And it's so much pride. And at the same time, it was also planting a little bit of a seed in my father, which was, I want my wife home. And this actually ends up leading our family to therapy. And I'm not sure if our first therapist, Tasia, a Russian immigrant, was a clinical social worker. I have a feeling that she was. But we ended up doing family therapy. My mom and dad did therapy in order for my father to understand what it was that my mother wanted to leave the house and work outside of the home, and how we were going to manage this as a family, and how it was going to be okay. And my mom only continued to grow. From there, she ends up, her kids, because she's like, I didn't get a high school degree. And we're like, go. And she becomes the head of the domestic violence project at Mujeres Latinas en Acción in Chicago, and becomes an activist for domestic violence at a time when, this domestic violence was not considered a big issue, or even one that should be punishable. There was activism that led to that. And my mom, as an untrained social worker, becomes a city and then statewide and then a national leader around the issue of domestic violence, all because she understood what she had in her as her capacity to be a social worker, trabajadora social, somebody who understood the social dynamic and the social connection. So that reality leads us to therapy, right? The whole crisis of my mother going to work leads us to therapy, which was the best thing that happened to my family. And it leads me to my very first deep experience with a therapist. Her name is Andaya de la Cruz. And if you want to learn more about her, I'm doing a series of essays about her on my newsletter, which is mariahinojosa.bulletin.com. I'm glad I remembered that. It's a weekly newsletter into your email. It's a chance where I can write about whatever I want to write about. That's maybe not, next week I'm writing about my favorite foods, but Andaya de la Cruz was my therapist, the woman who saved my life. What was she? A clinical social worker. We lost Andaya. Oh, I'm going to get all teary-eyed. I'm not going to do that. Andaya passed away just a few days after Christmas. We lost her. And I'm really, really, really broken up. Although what she has done here, because I'm in the Caribbean, I'm in Punta Cana, and I'm steps away from the ocean, is that she has led me back to the ocean so that every morning, okay, I'm not trying to rub it in, but I am, I'm able to spend some time with my feet in the water and talk to Yemaya, the goddess of nature, and try to understand what happened. Why is it that Andaya left us? And what I'm writing about is the lessons that Andaya taught me that were my life lessons. If you read Once I Was You, Dr. Zayas, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction and talking about Once I Was You, because I write about Andaya. Andaya was the person who helped me to understand imposter syndrome. She was the one I wrote about. It'll drop. It just dropped, actually. And I wrote about how I started to go see her was because a friend of mine who was also a social worker could see that I was about to make a very bad mistake. I was going to choose to stay with the two-timing alcoholic man that I had been involved with for 3.5 years out of a sense of loyalty, instead of choosing the man who had just recently come into my life, my future husband, Germán Pérez, who just brought me coffee. I mean, that's what you call. He just sees me working. He just brought me just a little bit of decaf coffee. Gracias, baby. Andaya it was like an urgency. My friend said, you have to go see Andaye. She's a clinical social worker. She's the best therapist. You need to read Codependent right now, Codependent No More, and you need to go see her. And Andaye said to me, listen to me. And I was like, well, I think I need to go be with that man because I've been with him and I, out of loyalty. And even though, you know, he has not been very good to me, but now he's making all the promises. He's going to stop drinking. He's going to get a job. He wants to marry me, not for the papers, but for the love, you know. But there's this other man who just appeared in my life who's like extraordinary and incredible. And Andaye said, how many times has he made those promises to you before? And I was like, oh, many. And she said, and how many times has he kept them? And I said, none. She said, put your feet on the ground, open your eyes. And that's why I chose to marry Herman Perez. And we've been married 30 years together, 31. And within the first 6 months of Herman and I being together, what did we do? We went to do therapy with Andaye de la Cruz, where she's taught me a beautiful lesson about love and relationships, whereas that we must put our love and our family and our relationships first, our compañeros or compañeras first. And, you know, because I didn't do that, I almost lost that all. But one of the lessons that I've been thinking about from Andaye is that I think I appreciated seeing her because she was not a psychotherapist. Precisely because she was not a psychotherapist, I felt more safe and secure with her. And Andaye was able to, again, because she was so rooted in social work and in community work and in activism, she was able to not only do the emotional, psychological work that I needed, but she was able to put it in the context structurally, which is very important for us. We understand it now. We understand structural white supremacy, structural racism, structural poverty. Back then we understood it. We just didn't have the exact words necessarily. But Andaye, who had a class consciousness, she was from a working class family, Puerto Rican and Brazilian father, raised in Queens. She had a race consciousness because she was a Black woman. She had a deep political consciousness because she was a independentista puertorriqueña fighting against the colonization of her island. And so Andaye, precisely because she was not a psychoanalyst, was able to give me that kind of larger analysis that I needed. And it worked for me. And so many beautiful lessons that she taught me. But one of my favorite was I write about her a lot when I had to deal with the imposter syndrome, which is something that really connected with a lot of people. And Once I Was You, I think a lot of people were just like, "Ay, Maria, you're so successful. Why do you want to write about your imposter syndrome?" And I'm like, because I don't want you to have to suffer through it the way I did and have to go through years of therapy to understand it. I would go to therapy and I just say, "Oh my God, Andaye, they're going to find out." And she'd say, "Find out what, Mamita?" So they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing, that I don't really know what I'm doing. And she's like, "Yes, but you've been doing it for 3 years now successfully." And I would tell her about this recurring nightmare that I had, the only one that I had, and thank God it's not around anymore. Oh God, thank God. But it was the elevator falling, getting into an elevator and then just falling and what would happen. And so Andaye said, "Okay, well, let's play it out. You're in the elevator. It has fallen. It has crashed to the bottom, but you're alive. A little bruised up, but you're alive. What are you going to do?" It was almost like, and so they've discovered you. Okay, so they've discovered you that you can't write that script. Okay, so you're down. What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't understand the question. She was like, "What are you going to do?" She was always so clear. "What are you going to do?" And I was like, get up. Exactly. The lesson of Andaye, that is a very important one for us who do this kind of deep work, deep committed work, and you'll read about this, but I'll tell you in case you don't. I'm not writing about it just yet, but Andaya essentially died of sadness. She suffered so much trauma. And it's almost like in her death, she was teaching us, if you give up, you can die. She gave up. And so it's a lesson so that we don't give up. Now, Andaya lived a full life. Andaya died at 71, I believe, but she could have lived probably another 20 years. And I'm 60. I can say that now because I put it on my Instagram. I was like, meh, but I did. And so I'm thinking a lot about the work that we have to do in the years that I have left, right? I'm not giving up, even though the things that I'm seeing, like you, the things that you're seeing are getting more intense, more horrific, more gaslighting, more human tragedy, more dehumanization. I don't know if I can say than ever, but oh my God, it's very high right now, what we're seeing and experiencing. And so what we need to do in the work that we're doing is also take care of ourselves in ways that's, surrounded by nature. If you're lucky, it's one of the ways that I take care of myself, but also doing the work that we have to do to understand ourselves. And I'm going to share a story that happened. I don't even know if Dr. Zayas knows this, how it happened, but because I've called Dr. Zayas on many occasions, just like, Luis, ayúdame, oriéntame, speak to me. And he's always been there for me. So thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Luis. So we all heard the voices of those babies and toddlers crying when they were put into cages. That's because of journalism. That's because of a whistleblower, maybe a social worker inside those detention camps that recorded that and got it to a journalist. And so I am looking for whistleblowers. And I know social workers who work within the system. And so I am speaking to you. Find me. I'm not that hard to find. My email is maria@latinousa.org. Not that hard. latinousa.org. Because of a whistleblower, we heard the tears of the babies and toddlers put into cages because of Donald Trump's zero tolerance policy, the utmost experience of dehumanization, and everything that Dr. Zayas has been writing about and warning us about. And they just said, we're going to go double down. We're taking the babies. And we were all traumatized by that. But suddenly I get a call from my mom crying. And the story had been that I knew that something had happened in the airport when we arrived with our green cards by plane with privilege to meet my dad at the University of Chicago. Something had happened with the immigration agent, but I didn't exactly know what until that day, soon after those voices of the children were heard crying. My mom calls me and she says, oh my God, this could have been me. And I said, Mom, ¿de qué hablas? And she says, Maria, the moms, I'm realizing that the reason why I'm feeling this way is because it could have been me. I could have been them. And I'm like, sí, mami, muy difícil. And she says, no, you don't understand. They tried to take you. The immigration agent tried to take you from me. That could have been you. I was in an airport back when we were in the days when we were flying all over the place. I was in an airport and I suddenly just understood. I started crying and I was like, oh my God, I understand why I do what I do. The seeds that I talk about, the planting of those seeds. Now I understand the clarity of why I do what I do, why I am a journalist, because of course, so many times throughout my career, I was told, oh, you know what? You're just a little bit too immigrant-y. You're not really objective on the issue of immigration. You're too close to the story. Now I understood why I dedicated my career to telling these stories, because the kind of work that you do can lead us to understand the deep trauma that then my mother carrying into her 8th decade. It's when my mom is in her 80s that she understands what happened when she was 25. And that I'm able to understand what happened to me when I was a baby and how that impacted the work that I'm doing today. And so that's why I'm saying trust in how you end up here. And that's why I'm so pleased about all of those awards and the dissertations, because this is how we change our country. I mean, look, this has been a really hard time, of course, January 6th, and just understanding the kind of structural challenge that we face in our great democracy where people can't vote. And so just kind of feeling very overwhelmed. And again, going to talk to Yamaya, the ocean, and just, understanding, yeah, well, you've been kind of in the struggle for justice in the United States since you were conscious. And then my therapist, kind of a running theme here, when we were doing some deep work now going back, and she just said, let's talk about the first moment of trauma that you experienced in your life. And I was like, oh yeah, it was when George Wallace was running for president, and my Jewish best friend and I were trying to figure out what basement we would hide in. Because I was Mexican and she was Jewish, and George Wallace didn't like either of those. And if he won, we were going to have to hide at 6 years old. So I've been fighting against that. I've been fighting against that my whole life, or for justice, right? And so, am I tired? Well, sometimes. This is the long haul. Was Frederick Douglass tired? Was Harriet Tubman tired? They had liberation dreams. So we need to understand the context, right? So the context of understanding, like the separation of children, when you really put it into the context, and why the struggle continues, and why there will be more children that we need to service, and adults who grew up with this trauma, is because they took children away from indigenous people. When the Pilgrims arrived, some would say the first illegal aliens, a term I don't use, but just for thought, they had no permission, no papers. They took children from indigenous people. They took the children of enslaved people. They took the children of immigrants, Mexicans, Asian people. The taking of children is not new in our country. And then we understand the connections, right? I understand that why the journalism that I do is connected to Frederick Douglass. He is my founding father in this country as an American journalist of conscience. Those are my roots. And so if you're able to draw your roots back 2 centuries, then you understand that when we're tired, we rest. Today, I woke up and I was it's gorgeous here, as you can see, but había como este granito of sadness, and I was like, God, I could really easily spend the morning feeling really sad and dark and depressed. I'm not depressed, but it felt blue. And I'm not dismissing, by the way, clinical depression, which you cannot solve by just, going and connecting to nature and talking to the ocean. I understand that. But for me, I had to do the work to pick myself up, because I had to be here, and good for you and for my family too. But I allow myself to feel the trauma. And now I have a beautiful Argentinian refugee, daughter of refugees, believe she's also a clinical social worker who is my therapist now, a former lawyer. I met her when she was doing therapy and social work for trafficked women, and I was reporting about her. And by now, Andaye was on her downward spiral, and I needed a new therapist. And this is how I connected to Cristina, who has saved my life multiple times. Mostly because in the work that we do, it's very easy for that to come into our homes. When you add on to that a high-level position like trying, journalism in the United States, television journalism, public journalism. By the way, we're no longer distributed by NPR, Dr. Zayas. We're distributed by PRX. And you can look into some of the reporting that's just happened around that. That happened a year ago. But in my role as a journalist, it calls for a very high level, high pressure situation. And, having to be able to deal with the constant criticism of you're not objective. What's the matter with you? You're too political, when we understand that everything in our country is political. And so as I was thinking about my speech today, I thought about the reporting. I hope you can listen to it, that we were able to do, because we're going back to stories now. It's not just that we're going to come in and tell the story. There are places where I feel we have to go back. And one of those places is Mississippi. Mississippi, the fastest growing demographic group in Mississippi are Latinos and Latinas, many of them from Guatemala, for whom Spanish is their second language. And this is an area where ICE did a raid, the largest workplace raid in American history, and took over 700 workers from their jobs in the chicken plants. And we've gone back now twice. We've done award-winning work. I hope you can listen to it on the Latino USA feed. And in this last visit that I went back, when was it? I guess late in the summer. It was before Omicron, before Delta, or it was right around Delta, actually. It was raging in this part of Mississippi. And I interviewed a little boy whose father had been deported, whose father was now back, because his father never gave up and, just made his way back. The hero of the picture, just like, battling jungles, to get back to his family. And I asked the little boy what it was like when his father was gone. And the description that he gave of his heart was that his heart was exploding, that it was like there were bombs going off in his heart. And the way he spoke was so profound. His father came back and I asked him, how is his heart now? And he said, it's like there's flowers blooming. It's like it's warm and fuzzy and safe, he said about his heart. And so I, as a journalist, I connect in a way that is much deeper now. And this is raising all kinds of questions for me, because the reporting that I'm doing now has, I guess, because again, when you get older, it's like, okay, nothing is going to hold me back. And so I did end up going to the jungle in Colombia on the border of Panama, the Darien rainforest jungle, to see what that was like. And I met superhuman beings there fighting for their lives, whether they were from Nigeria or Haiti or Cuba or Venezuela. And I met people on the caravan that has been categorized as shady characters. And no, actually, they are the heroes of the picture. They are the most honorable, the strongest, the people who believe in dreams and hopes. I was with them on the caravan when they woke up one morning after sleeping in a plaza on the sidewalk with blue tarp beneath them and above them, and that's all. Waking up in the darkness, and by 5:30 already walking, knowing that they had 8 or 9 hours ahead of them, and they still had a month of walking. But the way they walked, like New Yorkers, they were just like, move out of my way, pushing strollers, somebody in a wheelchair. They were like, let's go at 5:30 in the morning. And so my work is to flip the narrative that the caravan is filled with the most hopeful people, the people that the United States was actually created for, them. And so I want to give you back the power. Not that anybody took it, but I want to emphasize for you to own the power that you have, because it's all we got. And we need to be talked up, right? And so after being on that caravan and seeing the people who I saw, meeting them, what's happening with them, unfortunately, some of them have disappeared. And so I wake up sad, like, when will I hear from them? Where are they? Were they kidnapped? Because the United States and Mexico are both working together to put immigrants, migrants, and refugees into the most dangerous kind of situations, and they're creating that unnecessarily. The country that I was born in, that was not an immigrant country, but in many ways is, and the country that I became a citizen of that calls itself an immigrant country. And both of them, Mexico and the United States, both working together to keep immigrants and refugees down. And so the importance of the work that we do. And I wrote down solidaridad, solidarity. You know, sometimes it can be like that. Oh, solidarity. When you do the work that you do and the people that you work with feel your heart, that is a word that can be used to describe this. Solidaridad, solidarity. I am with you. It's not just empathy. It is active. It is an action, right? Even if what you are doing is listening or giving a pathway or giving connections. The first person, when we realized that Andaya was really struggling soon before her death, was a social worker. That's who came to try to save Andaya's life, a social worker. Her own people. And so I'm here to tell you, please don't give up. Two stories that I'm just going to leave you with that I have been working on. I use as an example talking to my fellow journalists, many of whom are much younger than me. And I talk to them about the importance of not giving up, which is different than, I want you to work hard, but you need to take time off in order to be doing this work, right? But at the same time, it's about the long commitment. And so if you haven't heard Suave, the podcast, I meet Suave in the year 1993 when he was scheduled basically to spend the rest of his life and die in prison, in a maximum security prison in Graterford, outside of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. And I start sending him Christmas cards. And that's how we stay in touch. But it becomes a journalistic endeavor. And because Suave was sentenced as a juvenile, and because of the Supreme Court, prior Supreme Court, decided that it is inhuman to sentence a juvenile to life without imprisonment without the possibility of parole. That's how Suave got out. And we've told that story in the Suave podcast. Imminently bingeable. Just got nominated for an International Documentary Association Award, which is kind of like being nominated for an Oscar. But the story is about hope. And actually, it's the social workers in Suave's life that I'm not going to reveal because it's very dramatic. They're there in one of the most dramatic moments of Suave's life. It's the social workers. God, I hadn't written that down in my speech, but it's like, oh my God, it's such a beautiful moment. And you'll know when you listen. It's not in the very beginning. And the other story that I'm committed to telling is also a long-term one. It's about Estrella. Estrella is an undocumented Mexican trans woman who is serving her sentence for the nonviolent crime of fraud in a maximum security men's prison in northern Texas. And we've been following Estrella's story. We are the only ones who are able to tell that story exclusively. And if you listen to the work with Estrella, yes, she's in a men's prison. Yes, she's been assaulted there. Yes, they are throwing the book at her. But in the work that we do, it's not always just talking about the horrible and the sadness. It's also about the love and strength. And so I'll leave you with this lesson, not from Andaye, but from Cristina, my therapist, which is when she works with immigrants and immigrant families, and we're dealing with the fear of deportation. And I just love the way Cristina has always allowed me to flip the narrative. And so she says to the families, you left your country and left everything behind, and you made a new life in a country where you didn't even speak the language. You have all of the tools that you need. And if you are sent back, you go back with your head up, knowing that you have all of these tools and that you have survived the most challenging of all circumstances. And this is not an act that is a loss or represents something that you have done. Take everything that you have learned and understand that you have that power and the energy. You take it with you, even if they're trying to take it away from us. So thank you for listening. I'm super excited for your questions. And yeah, I think there are microphones up there. And so I believe that I'm going to start hearing you.
Yes, there are, Maria. Do you have anyone coming up to the mic? While we do, because it takes a few steps to get to a mic, Maria, I want to thank you very much for your words. And I think they certainly speak to us. I've got a few areas. One of the things, we spend a lot of time at this conference speaking about research and how we do it and how we get funded and what the issues are. And there's always the idea of this objectivity. But like you say, everything is political. And yesterday we had with us the editor of Science magazine who said even science is political.
Claro.
Nothing is without a political framework. Could you say more about what that means for journalism, for social work researchers, and how do we avoid or sidestep or undermine or use or whatever the fact that it is political and use it to the benefit of our research, which is intended to benefit the people that we care most about, those in our communities?
The thing about that, Luis, my dad, may he rest in peace, he worked grant to grant from the NIH and other places because he was researching how to create the cochlear implant. And so I understand the grant process from a science perspective and, kind of what you have to do, but it is a very different thing. And this is where I'm like, that's an interesting question because I don't really spend my time within this sphere of kind of science. In the world of journalism, and I imagine that the same thing has happened, but I don't know how quickly. In the world of journalism, journalism and media has been very slow to change. Let me give you an example. You began to see a lot more Black faces doing political analysis once Barack Obama had been elected president. Prior to that, still, right now, we still don't see enough Latino and Latina faces covering politics, even though we're the second largest voting bloc in the United States. We don't vote as a bloc, but second largest population cohort, largest potential voting cohort. So Luis, one of the things that happened actually, that saying in Spanish, no hay mal que por bien no venga, is that one of the things that happened within the sphere of journalism is that not for everybody, but this notion of objectivity and there being two sides to everything, suddenly that comes smack dab with zero tolerance policy and the taking of children. So that suddenly journalists have to be like, well, what are both sides of taking children? There are not two sides. And so many journalists did continue with the both sides-ism, even in the coverage of Donald Trump, which has been very dangerous for our democracy. But on the other hand, for example, for me as a journalist, it was going to be very difficult, let me just be straight up, for a white man, cis man, in a very senior editorial journalistic position during the Trump administration when it was clear that Trump ran on hate speech against Mexicans, and I'm a Mexican immigrant, and his continual hate speech about Mexican immigrants, it became very difficult for those journalists, Luis, to suddenly call me on it. You know what I'm saying? And to just be like, Maria, you're seeming a little bit too Mexican-y, it's going to be very hard for them to do that because they were witnessing what was happening. And so in that sense, no hay mal que por bien no venga, there was something that changed. Like I'm not getting those emails from high level journalists who are saying, wow, do you think that you kind of crossed the line there? No, because who crossed the line was the administration. And by the way, there are children that are still being taken. Let us be clear. On the issue of things being political. In the case of immigration, both Republicans and Democrats have thrown immigrants under the bus and run them over. I'm sorry to be so graphic, but yes, literally thrown them under the bus and run them over back and forth multiple times, both parties. And so, my role as a journalist is now doubling down, not on this, and we're going to be more objective, but rather doubling down. And you'll see, if you look at Futuro Media, at the kinds of journalists who we are hiring, because we want to hold the systems and people that be accountable. That's the power that we have, and we have to use it. So I'm really glad that you had the editor-in-chief of Science Magazine. That makes me really, really happy, and that we're clear that yes, science has become political, as horrible as that is. And then it's better. I think we're a better society for speaking the truth.
Thank you, Maria. While we wait for another, you mentioned whistleblowers, right? And that they help the journalists uncover stories. Here at this conference, we have very junior researchers, senior researchers, and people in between who are doing community-based research, caring about the communities that you and I know, and many others. How can we get the science and the journalism together so that we can benefit you and your work, and you can help us find new directions for research? Because oftentimes journalists will uncover things that few of us know about, and then we begin. So you mentioned Elaine, the late Elaine. I was doing my work with the Latinas, and it was Elaine who helped me articulate it more sharply, and then helped bring it to the three days of stories in El Diario La Prensa and then the New York Times. How can we in science, social sciences, in particular social work science, work with journalists to bring forward what we're finding, whether it's this intervention works or this is the struggle of a particular community writ large, any community, but the communities that we care about?
So listen, I think, and by the way, if you look at my bulletin, my newsletter drop, Luis, I'm so glad, because as you were speaking, I was like, oh my God. So I've been speaking about Andaye, may she rest in peace. But the photograph on my bulletin drop, you will see Elaine. Elaine's little head is popping there. And it's like Elaine and Andaye together. They knew each other, and they're watching us from above. But Elaine is in the bulletin graphic that I just created for this week's drop. So it's really beautiful that she's making such a presence. Elaine Rivera presente, Puerto Rican from Ohio, super super proud Puerto Rican from Ohio. I think we have to, and that's why I'm glad that we're kind of showcasing the relationship that you and I have, Luis. We have to do this kind of work. So what am I trying to say? Find the journalists that you respect and you like reading or seeing or listening to their work. Connect with them. You're thinking, oh, well, what's that journalist going to want to hear from me? Or Maria Hinojosa is super busy. I'm not going to reach out. She wouldn't. No. Journalists are only as good as the sources that we have. So I love that there was this collaboration between you, Luis, and Elaine in the sense of how can we articulate it? And that's how we work together. But what I'm trying to say is it basically starts from a relationship. It doesn't just kind of, poof, just happen. And so we have to work at creating these relationships because you're human and I'm human. So if we get on the phone the way Luis and I do, and we're like talking something over and we're coming to a solution, we're humanizing each other, right? So that I can call him at any time, he can call me, right? And that's really what a source relationship is like. It's not that the source is always, just like, let me feed you something, or I've got the whistleblower, it's building a friendship and relationship of trust. So I guess what I'm going to say is I'm going to put it on you, because I'm speaking to social workers, right? I'm not speaking to journalists. So I'm going to put it on you. You have to own the power that you have, and the connections and the stories that you are seeing and the people that you're connected to. You have to own that power to then push you to get in touch with the journalist, whoever it may be, the highest national profile or international or local. And you never know, maybe maybe Christiana Amanpour won't write back, but you never know. Maybe she will.
Great. Thank you.
Let me just tell you this before I made a phone call yesterday, Luis, to somebody in the state of Texas. I'm not going to reveal it, but state of Texas, Department of Corrections. But you know what I found? Because I'm covering the story of Estrella, right? And I'm just like not giving up. I found a human being on the other end of the line. And all I can tell you is that this human being in Department of Corrections, state of Texas, a very tough system, he referred and used Estrella's proper pronouns throughout the entire conversation. And so that relationship right there, from a phone call between me, a source trying to get me to understand what's going on. So pick up the phone. Don't be afraid, again, to use your power.
Thank you, Maria. We have some questions from the audience. For the folks at the microphone, please give your name and your affiliation.
Hello, Maria. Monica Gutierrez, doctoral student, Arizona State University. I feel like you're talking to me, this big screen. I feel like we're having a one-on-one right now. You don't know it, but we really are.
And I'm hugging you right now. I'm hugging you right
Maria,
now.
Abrazos. Oh my gosh. I feel like continuing this conversation of the interconnectedness between journalism and academia. I mean, in the newsroom, there's a lot of lack of representation, and my orientation is specifically in Phoenix, Arizona, with Gannett. I'm just going to throw them out there, right? And the lack of representation, and women of color being forced out of journalism rooms. And I feel like I have a lot of journalists that are my friends because of this nuance, right? It happens in academia too. But I feel like you've created this family in itself to combat that. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you went about that. And I can't even imagine the folks that work in that space now knowing that there's such a battle to be had. But again, it's the same in academia, and that's why my friends and I really have so much in common. We write about stuff that a lot of people don't want to hear about. So, and thank you. Right, Suave is like the best podcast, y'all, so you better check it out.
I hope we win the IDA award. We were so excited because Suave was going to go to LA for the first time in his life. We were going to go to Los Angeles for the award ceremony at the beginning of February, but Omicron canceled that. So Suave is not going to go. I'm hoping we win. So, when people ask me about what it was like to create Futuro and, and I'm very honest. I was like, look, I was terrified. I really didn't know what I was doing, but I knew that I could no longer fight or fit in the structures of mainstream media. I had reached the top of pushing for recognition and representation, and I was tired. And I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know enough about social work institutionally. But I know that one of the things that my students, many of whom will talk about careers in social work, they'll say that they want to create their own nonprofit community-based organization. And that's where I'm like, so your journalist friends who are going through the same thing, or you're feeling the same thing, I think we have to get really creative. And it's really hard, by the way. Scary, terrifying, so hard to create an organization. You can't do it alone. That's what I did learn, right? I didn't do it alone. I had people who were like, yeah, Maria, let's do this. I will, and then we get the first grant and it's like, oh my God. But everything is hard. And so I'm just encouraging you to just think outside of the box, right? After, the dissertation is done. I don't know enough about funding. That's why, but I'll tell you this, funding for women journalists who are not white, who are running nonprofit independent newsrooms, like this much funding. But I shake the trees and I look at people like Luis, and he inspires me because he had to go through the institutional shaking too. So I'm like, we are in a different paradigm. What we have lived through post 9/11, etc. Donald Trump, COVID, pandemic, shutdown. We've lived through so much that if we don't think we're capable of creating anything or of doing, like, this is the problem that I'm having right now with my adult kids. Because, I did go to the jungle. This was one of the things I was most scared to go into the Darien jungle. I had heard such horror stories from immigrants and refugees, but I did it. And so now I'm like, ten cuidado, because I'm not afraid of anything now. And so I'm about to get a puppy. They're like, are you scared? I'm like, I can't wait. I'm getting a puppy. They're like, you're not going to be able to do it. I'm like, I can be in the jungle. I can handle a puppy.
All right, Maria, we have time for one more question from the audience.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Sandra Crew, Howard University. And what you have made me think about, we talk about interdisciplinarity with social work. And I don't know that we've talked enough about interdisciplinarity with our schools of journalism in our programs. It's often health related and STEM related. And you have sort of talked about an opportunity that we have there. So I sort of like your ideas about this, since COVID-19 was the expose for racial disparities in this country as well as racism.
I like the way you're thinking. Make it happen. Because seriously, I want you to understand, and that's why I keep saying, use your power, use your power. Again, on a personal level, what my social workers did for me in my life. But then when we think structurally and the power that you have, and that's why I'm such a fan of Dr. Zayas, what can we do structurally? And like I said, we are going to be tired. I really thought, Luis, te lo juro, I really was like, no, when I'm this old, things are going to be, because I don't feel old at all. You can tell I'm not that. But I was like, at least things are going to be better, right? At least the arc towards justice will really clearly be bending. And it's like the resistance is so clear. And so we cannot give up, and we must feel hopeful. And so I'm so thankful to all of you for the work that you do and for the hope that you have in our common humanity. Thank you so much. Please excuse me that I wasn't there with you, but let's do it again when we're done with La Rona.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Maria. Maria, you have truly spoken to the hearts of those of us here at this conference. We work hard to achieve. We encourage our students, our up-and-coming researchers, to continue to achieve, to dedicate themselves to their calling, because that's really what it is. It's a calling to work on behalf of oppressed and marginalized people, and to deal with what we've all, and even in older age, the imposter syndrome that just will stay with us. It doesn't get shaken easily, but we have to persevere. And thank you, Maria. You show us the power of a story and of narrating the story so well. So thank you very much. Enjoy your time in the Dominican Republic. Hope to see you back in New York soon.
Besitos, everybody. Have a great conference.
With that, colleagues, we end the presidential plenary. Thank you so much. And we'll have a membership meeting in a couple of hours, or at least an hour or so. Thank you.